Welcome everybody to Peace Building with Hannah Jewell. In this podcast, we look at our current moment of transition, especially issues doing with food, healthcare, and healing. Today, we have Dr. Matthew Shijoe here, who is an Ayurvedic doctor and clinician. He studied Ayurveda at the University of Calcutta in Kerala, has a PG diploma in Panchakarma practices, and has done clinical research. He teaches at the Jivita Academy online. He consults for the Ananda Clinic in Rishikesh, and we are so lucky here in Sussex that he practices in Hollingbury at the Circle Clinic. Today we'll be talking about different approaches to health and healing between East and West and about his Ayurvedic practice. Welcome, Dr. Matthew.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's my pleasure.
Maybe you could start by talking to us about what is Ayurveda.
Definitely. So my practice in UK and mainly after I completed studies, I realized that part of the practice itself is educating and making everybody understand and demystifying what Ayurveda is. So in essence, I've learned to sort of explain it in different ways, and I think the best explanation I've come with now is that Ayurveda is not a science, it's a way of living. It is understanding the nature of ourself and trying to modify the environment around you, including your diet, your lifestyle, into a way that can support you maintain a certain level of balance and prevent illnesses that way. And if there is any anomalies, how we can utilize this knowledge of how our body interacts with our environment and bring about balance rather than just address the symptoms. So it's basically a way of living, I think.
Mm-hmm. To be truly effective, it's got to be a full way of living.
Yes, definitely. And I think it also, there is a huge emphasis on preventing illnesses. I think it's also based on when it originated, like the science the texts which we follow are around 2000 to 3000 years old. That's because that's when they were written. But before that, they were still propagated through oral traditions, and you can see that most of them are written in verses rather than as long like prose. And I think that the time when it was originated, we all know that the general average lifespan was quite less compared to now. But we also know that is because once you have an illness, the chances of recovery are lesser. Doesn't mean that nobody lives beyond 40 or the average lifespan is say 35 or 40. It doesn't mean that everybody struggles to age to 80 or 90 or 100. There's still people who manage to do that, but if you get into an illness, a state of illness, the chance of recovery is much lesser. So priority is always given to, rather than managing a crisis, how you can prevent it. So there's a lot of detail into understanding what exactly is real health, what exactly is balance, and the details of it, and then trying to sort of manage those elements and bring about better health and better resilience to changes around you rather than managing the crisis. I think what we have as a healthcare system now tilted towards managing issues, and that way we have lost our ability to focus on maintaining resilience, which is what this pandemic and everything is showing us that we need to do.
Mm-hmm. With proper resilience, we may not be in a position where a global pandemic would break out to begin with.
Definitely. I think we can see that the illness right now we're facing is also, it varies a lot the way it affects every individual. It doesn't show that same behavior of say tuberculosis or leprosy, which are all communicable diseases like this. It has so much wide variety that itself shows that the individual is a very active player in this. Can't be dealt with like how we dealt with all those pandemics or communicable diseases, because the individual himself plays a huge role in this particular illness. So the amount of resilience, the amount of good health and balance that you physically and mentally develop will definitely affect the outcome of this disease for sure. I think it's just needs to be further studied to find out some evidence, which is a language which will speak more clearly to the scientific community of our generation.
A language around resilience and health.
Yes, so it feels like a bit superficial sometimes, because we are talking about resilience, strength, all of which has got very deep meaning, but a person who is hearing it without the background of understanding the philosophy and the ideas behind it would feel like it's quite superficial. So it would lack the same impact when somebody who knows the philosophy of balance or philosophy of health in an Ayurvedic or a traditional, or I would say as more natural point of view, they will understand it much less deeper. So we will always, I that was my intention of going into studying clinical research and the regulatory aspect behind it. But I got called into a bit more clinical and patient-based work in later, so I didn't get to continue that process of translating these ideas into something that the scientific community can understand.
We've talked a lot in our conversations about this meeting between Eastern and Western medicine, or alternative and allopathic approaches, and where it's at right now. Could you tell us a little bit about how Ayurveda has developed in the last century or so, and where it's at, and the important role that research is playing in its continuation?
Definitely. So in basically with my experience of Ayurveda in India, I can see that there is a constant effort now in not just sort of updating it for the modern lifestyle and the modern causative factors which never existed a long time ago when it was Ayurveda was developed, but there is also an effort into translating the language so that the wider population can absorb it. I think the culture and the sort of understanding in India also has changed a lot. India also has been sort of going through more sort of the changes that happened in society maybe in Western world few decades ago. So gradually it's sort of letting go of some of its good things and absorbing scientific, the modern way of looking at health and taking care of health, focusing more on nutrition and the macronutrients rather than looking at the whole essence of it, and whether the food itself is natural, whether it is cultivated, organic. All of these are new things, but at the same time quite old concept. We value how these are these each food is where it is cultivated, the diversity in how different food actually affects you based on which climate it was harvested. All of that went away when food became produced in a large scale. So I think there is a huge change in India in terms of effort put towards teaching that Ayurveda is also something that you can explain in a modern language, in a scientific language. And when we spoke about, I remember when we spoke about the presence of Ayurveda and other alternative methods of healing and living in a time where modern medicine is also equally significant, the factor which is quite important is the boundary. I've always believed that there is a boundary between these. There are some things where Ayurveda is really good at, say for example, chronic illnesses where there are multiple factors related to physiology. There is factors related to mind. All of this comes together, and it's important to have an holistic overview. If you use that modern sort of reductionist point of view to heal something, say for example, let's say depression. If healing depression or dealing with depression and its effect on a person is prescribing antidepressants which control certain parts of the biology or the physiology related to serotonins, trying to sort of maintain its level in the system, that completely unfortunately ignores the external stress factors, the life circumstances, the physical ailments or any other factors that might be contributing towards it. So all of that is ignored in favor of something which reduces a symptom, which is where I think modern system needs to understand its boundaries, that Ayurveda understand its boundaries, like you cannot heal or deal with somebody who is involved in a road traffic accident, or you cannot actually help a person to do a organ transplant. So there are things which Ayurveda should never venture into. I would definitely say that it's a bad idea, but there are also things that modern system cannot do, and that needs to be also somewhat actively discussed and understood. And that way I think the strength from both these ideologies, both these way of looking at health, can work quite well together.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's for the betterment of a person's life, so it has to be, that focus shouldn't be lost while competing for, say, better way of dealing with a particular symptom.
So if we're looking at a person's entire lifestyle and the essence of their living as part of their health, then how does that person actually address that within an Ayurvedic system? Is it just through changing their diet? Do they take supplements? Are there practices? And what is the process of getting to that essence?
Yeah, so the philosophy behind it is quite complex, but the practical application is usually quite simple. The idea is that your food is actually your medicine. If you properly understand what your body needs and properly understand the quality of food beyond this whole labeling of its nutritional value or its sugar and salt content, how you understand that food, you can then utilize food and combinations of different things to balance your whole system. And sometimes when food is not sufficient, where there has been deeper imbalances or chronic imbalances, we can use herbs and natural sort of ingredients that would bring that balance and then continue to maintain that same benefit using food on its own. And sometimes, my teacher always says this joke, and I might have mentioned this earlier, that medicine is basically food that tastes quite bad. If it tasted good, we would have consumed it regularly and would have gained all the benefit. But because it tastes bad, we stopped using it, and we needed to be reminded. And sometimes these imbalances and symptoms are a reminder towards certain flavors that we are missing in our diet. For example, a balanced diet in an ancient Ayurvedic point of view is not a balance of the nutrients per se, the protein, carbohydrate, vitamins, minerals, etc. It's a balance of all the flavors: sweet, sour, salty, spicy, bitter, and astringent. And if we look at our diet, everyday diet at the moment, it's predominantly sweet, salty, maybe a bit of sour element, but bitter, astringent, or even spices will be somewhat minimal. And when we are missing it, most of the time my medicines will be bitter, obviously, because it has to balance that aspect that we gain from it. And each of these flavor indicates some qualities within it and indicates its ability to balance some functions within our body. So if we are tilting too much towards sweet, sour, salty, there will be definitely medicines that are opposite to its taste.
So this brings us to the doshas, and this is a really broad way of people understanding their essence and their type. Of course, we're all a combination of the different doshas, and there's much more to our essence than just the label of our dosha.
Definitely.
For sure. But I think for our listeners, it might be helpful in understanding how those 6 tastes and that holistic way of approach can fit in with their body. You know, in the West, we say, "Are you an apple shape, or a pear shape, or a cucumber shape?" But I think the doshas are much more complex than
Yeah,
that.
I think the whole concept behind doshas is never to label or put a person into a particular box. The goal of doshas is to identify that, simplify what's happening within the body, and also find a common denominator between you and the environment around you. So if we have the same basic elements creating your body, creating everything else that you know around you, then you can utilize these to help balance yourself. That's the basic idea. And doshas are in effect a simplified way of looking at body functions, and doshas come from the point of view of defining health, and health is always understood as homeostasis or balance, and doshas help us understand what are we trying to balance. And I can quickly explain the doshas without making it sound like it's a Ayurveda lecture, but I like explaining the doshas. So doshas basically are 3: Vata, Pitta and Kapha. Each of them represents certain functions. Like I mentioned, the Vata is word meaning is like air. So it basically indicates anything within your body which has certain characteristics of air. It's nothing related to breathing. It is nothing related to gases within your body or vacuum spaces. It's more connected to the lightness and the movement within the body. So movement of food through your digestive system, your bones, joints and your nervous system, how they function, your movement of blood through your circulatory system. So all kinds of movements, it's categorized into one, and we call it Vata. Pitta is essentially all the functions related to metabolism, or in more sort of broadly change, transformation. So anything constantly changing. The biggest change is food transforming into the nutrients and the tissues that we need, or dhatus as we call it in Ayurveda. It could be also other forms of changes, like the changes within your body, like hormone related changes, functions of enzymes. All of this we put together as Pitta, and the only remaining function we understand is the function of nourishment or repair in certain ways. So that is what we call as Kapha, and balance of these 3 is understood as health. So that's why we aim, when we consult a person or try to understand a person's illness, what we aim is a balance of metabolism, movement and nourishment. When these 3 are in good rhythm, then that's the perfect situation for healing to happen. And when we say a person is of a certain type, say body type of Vata, it doesn't mean that it is a particular box in which all the diet factors, herbs and everything is pre-decided. It just means that there is a tendency towards that, and if you are exposing yourself to similar qualities of air, which is more similar ones are dryness and coldness, if you expose yourself to those qualities more often, you will see the effect of that much sooner than somebody who doesn't have an imbalance towards Vata. That's the only meaning. If you are the effect of it is more visible if you are exposed to those qualities. Otherwise, it doesn't make a person completely unique. When you are exposed to that for a very long time, you develop certain physical characteristic. But that's again not the reason why this concept of three doshas were created. It's basically to say that balance is important, not one of them.
This is so enlightening. I really am so happy that we can take the time, because my understanding of the doshas was much more simple, and I really appreciate this. And even having worked with you for several years in the healing of my skin and in my general well-being, I remember our conversations and the truth for me that to increase the nourishment part was really important, and that in addition to the herbs, that to take time to lay down and rest and pay attention to what's happening inside the body and how it's healing was almost equally important part of the prescription, so to speak.
Definitely, I think activities or the way we actually provide the overall environment for healing is not just food. Usually it involves, say, activities like sometimes applying oil or taking a hot bath or applying certain herbs or certain combinations externally on your body. So all of these, and also very important factor is the charya or the routine of things. So you create certain routine which you know is good according to the imbalance, according to the symptoms that are currently there. And sometimes change in routine always is faced with some resistance, but once you get into that routine, you will feel like that is the best way to maintain sort of subside the symptom and maintain good health and balance. And it gives the same effect as, say, popping a pill or taking a pain medicine. You just need that correct routine along with the right kind of herbs or right kind of diet. But getting into that is a process, usually what I guide a person to. Once they reach there, doesn't mean that the illness has gone forever, just that you are in better control rather than somebody else or some other chemical.
The viewpoint is not just to get rid of the symptom, but actually to increase the resilience and to treat every life situation as, okay, this is a test. Let's see how resilient my system is.
Definitely,
Yeah.
you are only as strong as all the troubles and stresses that we have faced. So if there is very less stress in our everyday life, the amount of resilience will also be lesser. So it is in a way bringing our body or exposing our body mindfully to different stresses. So even if a bitter food or including spices in the diet feels not normal diet, I like my meat and 2 veg, but that stress of getting into having a meal which has got these flavors into it is a good learning for your body, and that's also a way of looking at it. But I think it's a much easy to understand way of looking at it. It's good to expose to variations.
Wow, Dr. Matthew, this is also super fascinating. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about the way Ayurveda was practiced traditionally and that family knowledge and some of the changes that happened like in the 1950s in India, and share some stories maybe about that traditional way of practicing to open our imaginations.
Yes, so the traditional way of practicing Ayurveda was quite unique because I think it was not in a time where we are familiar with the public healthcare sort of system, like which is like NHS here in the UK. But the traditional treatment or Ayurvedic treatments were given to certain families as a responsibility for taking care of the health of people who live around. And most of the time it was quite common to not involve any monetary aspect in this process of transaction. So person comes for treatment to a Vaidya, it's traditionally known as a Vaidya, Vaidya's house. They make the assessment, does the treatment, they stay there, have food as almost like a guest in that house, and once the treatment is complete they are sent back to their home. There is no, the cost is actually borne by the family, and in return the system, at that time there was the kings and the chiefs and everybody, they are taking responsibility through this family for the health of the subject. So there is no cost involved. That's one salient feature. Another one is that similar to the GP system, because it's a small population taken care by one family, most of the people are very well known, even if it is a time, say 100, 200 years ago, where genetically carried diseases are not very clearly understood. Vaidyas clearly understand that this is from, person is from this family, they have a family history of certain illnesses, and how you should take precautions for that. That's a kind of a benefit. I expected GP way of sort of healthcare system focused on GPs here in UK would exist, but I don't think it has that much efficiency because it's much bigger in scale, unfortunately. In terms of herbs also, the traditional system in India, it doesn't involve lots of different variety of herbs imported from various other locations, and sort of specialized medicines, or most of the time the medicines were grown in that particular space itself, in the same climate ecosystem that the person is living, and there will be 4 or 5 different herbs used in different combinations for all kinds of illnesses originating for people in that place. And it usually works also quite well, because most of the time when we are importing some medicine from another place and then creating something out of it, it is widely varied based on where it is cultivated, how it is handled and prepared. Here, by making sure that you are seeing the plant right in front of you, you can enhance the quality that it gives you multiple times by, plants communicate, they are grown in that place, you are treating that in a certain way, you're taking care of the plant, and then you are using it in a smaller quantity but much more refined and precise way for various illnesses. It works really well. So most of the time, in like you're mentioning, in 50, 60, when the method of producing Ayurvedic medicines changed, and the change was that most of the Vaidyas preferred slowly to use medicines that are pre-prepared and bottled, or in powder form, or in tablet form. The capsules were not very common at that time, but in pre-prepared form, that sort of increased because it became quite convenient, and you could do more, see more people, treat more patients in a small set of time. Whereas when you are preparing, you have to collect it yourself or guide somebody to collect it, prepare it then and there, and then dispense it, which is in itself quite time consuming, but has definitely a superior quality in terms of how fast it can heal and how precisely it can act. But then I think the medicines in Ayurveda are slowly moving into a patented kind of system, which is there in modern medicine, that there are combinations that are tested for a few people, and then it becomes a patented medicine. The thinking behind prescribing it is basically symptom based thinking, not looking at the whole, or because there is no possibility of changing the combination or modifying it for the person. You're prescribing the pre-prepared medicine. So I think there is drawback in that. Slowly people are realizing that, and there's a lot more focus on creating your own sort of a apothecary or a herbarium apothecary, combination, so that you can at least have individual herbs. Like I practice here using single herbs or simpler combinations, and then mix and match them, which will have, in my view, a better effect than choosing the pre-prepared ones and just relying on that. I think it is the way our lifestyle has become faster. Everything has become faster, so Ayurveda also reflects some of the effect of a faster lifestyle, I think. But I think most people would realize that slow and precise is also a good way to deal with issues.
Realizing that in a lot of ways, there's something called the slow food movement, where people are really appreciating food that's grown locally and that the time has been taken and that's not mass produced in large quantities.
Yeah.
And it's a similar concept, but just with herbs and the food as the medicine.
Yeah, definitely. I think our relationship with food has been influenced by a lot of different factors, including what's easily available and what can be mass produced, say wheat or sugar and things like that, which were massively created through certain agricultural practices. So that influenced our illnesses also that we have at the moment, whether it is cardiovascular issues or diabetes and other metabolic issues. I remember in my childhood we used to try as much as possible not to buy vegetables, because vegetables used to grow in the house. You buy just grains, onion and potato, 2 or 3 different things, but everything else is cultivated within the household, and it keeps changing with time. If it's certain season, you get certain root vegetables, and they taste completely different to mass produce. Like for example, having banana here, it looks like banana, it tastes also like banana, but it's not actually the real flavor of having banana, which grows in different varieties. So we understand banana as just one particular fruit, but there are hundreds of varieties of banana. And now also, I think, even though it's agriculture mass produced, if you go to a shop in Kerala, you will have to tell which banana. It's similar to the situation of apple here. In India, if you go buy apple, you just buy apple.
Yeah.
There is no other names or varieties, just apple. Or oranges, it's just orange. But say in the case of banana, there are so many different varieties, and they all taste completely different. It's similar to there are the medicinal properties are also like that. If you mass produce herbs, they usually become a more sort of like mass produced banana. They are not actually exactly the same depth in flavor. There's not that much of active ingredients. I think I recently read also a study about tomatoes and the content of actual antioxidant and nutrients present in a supermarket variety and the one which is cultivated in a family in, say, Italy or somewhere, and then they compared the nutritional value. It was the supermarket one only looks exactly the same, 1/3 of nutritional value present in it, even if it is antioxidants or vitamins, minerals. So there is definitely a benefit in local and sort of slow process, like you mentioned. But I think we learn usually things the hard way. We experience the drawback of things by doing it, and then we go back to what is the best way.
Seems to be the way the human condition flows.
Yes.
I remember you sharing once about your time after your university education when you went and stayed with one of these families and you worked in a more traditional way. Could you share with us a little bit about your personal experience of that time?
Definitely, yes. I think while saying that experience, I can also talk about the education system in India, especially with respect to Ayurveda in traditional times it was a guru shishya kind of model where one person is a guru and he will decide to take 2 or 3 people to stay with him, study, experience the whole lifestyle, the way of dealing with a patient, how to treat them, how to take care of the each and every minute aspects is learned from face to face with one teacher. And it's almost sort of like changed because of how education is right now. It's very much university based and has its advantage because say for example translating this information into scientific studies that everybody can actually understand and gain benefit from, those are happening, but at the same time it lacks that face to face. There are dozens of lectures and hospital time and everything within this university uh, sort of model, but you lack that benefit or the experience that you gain in a traditional sense living in a place, and there are certain rules and regulations to it. So I actually finished my study and stayed with a traditional vaidya. So traditional vaidya is those families who are trained from generation to generation, they pass on, and one of them kindly allowed me to stay with them and experience their way of treating illnesses. And the one I chose was something which was a stream of Ayurveda, which is not very deeply studied. It's called Rasa Shastra. Rasa means mercury. So the Rasa Shastra side of it is only using minerals and metals, which is a very controversial subject at the moment because of what we know about how heavy metals affect our heavy metals are not in itself a problem. It's our system, because our body can only eliminate water soluble aspects, because our body is incapable of uh, eliminating things which are not easily dissolving in water. So if metals are present, body will separate it but then deposit it somewhere within the body, and it might go out through skin or hair, but most of it gets deposited within the body, which is toxic. So the Rasa Shastra aspect is just superficially dealt with, because nowadays in last maybe 40-50 years it's not very actively practiced. But I chose to go into a family who does that, to understand how they do it, how these procedures are done. They're quite regimental and they actually focus exactly on following the textual method of creating medicines with mercury. I had a few encounter myself with preparing mercury compounds with sulfur, and it involves churning. They don't use any modern machineries. They use the old stone mortar and pestle, and that was quite a good experience. I didn't take up Rasa Shastra as my main line of practice because I didn't learn enough in that much time, but I could understand that the potential is there. The Vaidya which I stayed with, he also visits universities in Japan where they study these mineral preparations for its properties, and they are doing research work. But unfortunately nobody in India is doing, because it has quite a bad PR. People usually are scared of metals or minerals in oral medication. So I did experience it, try to understand it, and the learning process is also quite different. You have to gradually gain confidence of that whole system. So you start by just um, helping out things, and sort of dealing with the outside of it, sort of cleaning up stuff and setting the consultation room, simple things, and then you gradually gain sort of exposure. And it is quite a privilege if somebody is allowed to sit in the consultation room while the consultation is happening. I actually got that, and then I stopped because I knew that I wouldn't be practicing this medicine myself, but it was quite an experience.
How wonderful to have the opportunity and the time to learn
It's quite
side
grateful.
by side. Yeah, and in the living situation. That's so special. How complex are the Ayurvedic knowledges and tools? So there's like Rajasashtas just with minerals, and I know like I take magnesium and iron, so there is definitely a place for minerals in our healing, as well as the balance of the heavy metals. But what are some of the, how many different specializations are there?
So there is mainly Ayurveda is sort of a blanket term used for all kinds of traditional medicine and healing practices. There is Ayurveda, there is Unani, which is more sort of influenced by Middle Eastern knowledge of traditional medicine and herbs. There is Siddha medicine as well, which is a completely different aspect of healing, but it also uses herbs and tilts more towards minerals than herbs. And these are all, I think, different based on where it originated. So Ayurveda in its form that, or in the form that I practice, is mainly towards the originates developed towards the tropical part where there is lots of different herbs available. There's the availability decides that, and there are some areas which are not that much lucky in terms of plant diversity. There will be more focus on minerals that are naturally available there, and this knowledge in time sort of is passed on to each. It is exchanged between different science, and it becomes part of Ayurveda. But there's also division in Ayurveda based on the method of treatment used. Say for example, Panchakarma in itself sort of is a specialization where all treatments are based on cleansing, which is also something which is essential from an Ayurvedic point of view, which is not that much unfortunately focused on from a modern science point of view. And there is also divisions on based on Kaya Chikitsa, which is treatment using that we practice using herbs and oils. There is also Shalya Chikitsa, which is only treatments only using instruments. So there will be different kinds of instruments for applying pressure or heat in varying levels, surgeries. So there is elaborate descriptions of various surgeries for issues that they had at that time, like wars were quite common at that time. So even plastic surgery is mentioned in Susura Samhita, one of the Ayurvedic textbook, in quite a bit of detail of one of the thing which I can remember, which is on nose reconstruction, which was for somebody who lost it in a fighting situation. So cut off your tip of the nose, and how to reconstruct it using the skin from your cheek and forehead. And that's exactly the same method still used in modern surgery for rhinoplasty. Some of the methods described are quite elaborate for surgery as well. So there are different sort of specialities in Ayurveda, some of which is quite actively used and evolving as well. For example, Panchakarma, cleansing has evolved from simple taking of herbs to more sophisticated external therapies and treatments, maybe in last few hundred years. Before that it was much more internal medicine based. External therapies become more and more part of it, but some of which has lost its potential as well. There's a lot of potential, but it's not being used like the surgery aspect of it, because it's, yeah, we have better ways of doing it, I think, now.
A system that's that deep and complex and rich is impossible for one person to fully study it all. And then when you start having different specialisms within it, then some of that knowledge gets lost. Like those families who are responsible, say, for curing snakebite or for other things, that knowledge gets lost. And then when we're studying generally, if I go to university and I study Ayurveda generally, I don't get the opportunity to specialize really at all. And so much of the knowledge goes unused.
Yeah, so in graduate level study in Ayurveda, you actually have a superficial idea of all these specialties, but you go deeper into Kai Chikitsa or the treatments using herbs and diet and all those aspects. You also study Panchakarma, but not too much deep, in-depth study on, say, Visha Chikitsa, which is for treatments of snake bites and different aspects related to it. And there's also this Rasa Shastra, which is mercurials and compounds which are heavy metal based. So those are not very actively studied, but there are specializations in universities. Like you can be a specialist surgeon in Ayurveda now, just slowly modifying it, and then gradually Ayurvedic surgeons were restricted to doing minor OT procedures until now, but gradually it's changing. There is better. I think it's important to bring together rather than create a new stream, especially in something which has gained so much improvement over time, like for example surgery. It's important to not have a parallel system developing which is always compared to the other one. There should be strengths gained from both of these. So there's very interesting sort of studies. I recently heard about, so in say for example, hemorrhoidectomy. Hemorrhoid is so common that everybody will encounter it at some point in life. Unfortunately, it's because of our sitting position, and we sit all the time. So gravity plays its role, and in hemorrhoids there is a treatment in modern surgery where they use a rubber band ligation to tie it, and it's quite rudimentary if you think about it. It's not very sophisticated surgical procedure, but that's the best in terms of risk versus outcome. It is the best method. And in Ayurveda there is a whole treatment process called Chara Sutra, where there are threads created using certain natural fibers, and these fibers are treated with different saps and different plant decoctions to make it more potent in a way, and that can be used for these ligations. And if it's created in a very secure and clinically sort of hygienic method, it will have very less sort of side effect compared to rubber band plastic ligation. This would be naturally absorbed because it's natural fiber, and it is treated with herbs which are naturally sort of promotes healing while helping with the removal of the hemorrhoid. So there are a lot of things where two of these knowledge can come together. This is just one of the examples. But that's very slowly happening, I think.
Your emphasis on this coming together of our different knowledge systems, and it brings a whole new depth to this meaning of complementary, and that the different systems can actually complement each other. It's a really beautiful way of thinking about it. In terms of our healthcare as a species, and here in the UK and around the world, like what is a positive future for healthcare that you would envision?
I think we do give a lot of our responsibility towards maintaining our own health to sometimes experts, and sort of sleepwalk into problems which are beyond the capacity of these experts to deal with. So we start with simpler issues like a variation in a sugar level, which can be easily managed in modern science with the existing knowledge, and we sleepwalk into much more serious issues over long term, because while we are addressing the symptom, we forget to look at the actual cause which led to it. So the responsibility of maintaining our health is completely our own. We discussed that briefly before this chat, and I think Ayurveda in its essence uh, brings the idea that it's your responsibility to know your body in a better way and to provide the right environment to heal while you are maybe addressing some of your symptoms using modern medicine or some kind of treatment that is offered in modern science like a surgery or anything. So if somebody does an angioplasty or something for their cardiac issue, it's not that it should be substituted. In future I feel that there is equal responsibility within the person to take the necessary steps in terms of diet, exercise, activities, and choose as much as they can do, and be able to sort of educate themselves with different modes that would suit their lifestyle. And I feel that the future of medicine is much more personalized. It has to be based on every individual, where we look at statistics and prescribe something based on the statistic outcome. Even if it is good for 60% of people, 40% of people are still suffering. So I think it's more important to take these short term acute remedies from modern medicine, but then also gain more knowledge and understanding of yourself, not just through Ayurveda, through different knowledge streams that we have available now, and use those to maintain that strength and resilience and take that responsibility to prevent illness or heal, create that better environment for healing together with what we have through the modern science. I think that's where I see, in at least in the short term, things going. In future, we don't know. Can never predict.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matthew. It's been so wonderful to have you here talking about
It's a pleasure.
health and healthcare and healing.
Yes, I think we could continue talking forever, but I think this was really good.
Yeah, it's been a joy to spend the time. If you are interested in contacting Dr. Matthew, you may reach him at drmatthew@thecirclehhc.com. He practices at the Circle Clinic in Hollingbury Hove, was classically trained in India, university trained in India, and has been practicing with us here in the UK since 2016. If you would like to share on this podcast, if you have something to do with health, healthcare, healing, food, diet, and our transitions, and you're local to Sussex, please get in touch with me. hannahjewelofpeace.com. You can find my email there, and I'd love to hear from you. And we would love to hear your thoughts on today's talk. We would love to feel how it's touched you, and if you have any feedback, send that along as well. Thank you so much for joining us.